whispers of rune terror.
Beneath Piltover's bridges, the world changes colour. Morning in the sumps does not begin with sunlight. It begins with coughing. A child wakes on a rusted catwalk, lungs already burning from the green-grey fog that never fully clears. Below, sump rivers churn with chemical runoff, glowing faintly where waste from an ancient canal meets modern factories. Overhead, chem lights flicker in sickly purples and blues, fighting a battle against the darkness. They can never fully win. A whistle screams somewhere in the smog. It cuts through metal, flesh, and thought at the same time. That sound means the day shift has started. Hundreds of mortals in filter masks and stained coats push toward a refinery gate, passing a back alley where a different transaction is taking place. Tiny vials of shimmer change hands, their liquid shifting with an unnatural, almost magical light. One dose to work longer, one dose to forget, one dose to never wake up. This is Zaun's Undercity in a single moment. So, how did the City of Progress end up standing on top of this? In order to understand Piltover's golden age, you have to understand the realm directly beneath it. Zaun is not just the poor district of Runeterra's most advanced port. It is a vertically engineered underclass, a whole civilization stacked in the shadows to catch the fallout of progress. Above, Piltover's bridges shine with hex-tech lamps and polished brass. Below, those same bridges trap fumes, funnel runoff, and cast permanent twilight over the sumps and the entresol. Essentially, the city is a single organism. Piltover is the glittering brain and smiling face. Zaun is the lungs and liver, filtering poison, processing fuel, and paying the biological price. In current times, every Zaun champion you know is a direct product of this design. A boy who refuses to accept that his friends must die young becomes Echo, bending time in alleys that Piltover maps do not even name. A visionary who sees the potential of flesh and steel augmentation in a place where bodies are already breaking becomes Victor. A chemist working at the absolute edge of ethics, surrounded by disposable test subjects and limitless waste, becomes Singed. I'm only speculating here, but even Renata's belief that contracts matter more than compassion makes perfect sense when survival itself is a negotiation. So, how did Zaun become this Undercity at all, and not an equal twin to Piltover? Why do chem barons rule with private armies while councillors dine above the smog? By the end of this video, you will be able to watch any Zaun cinematic, story or champion voice line and instantly place it in its social, political and technological context. We are going to move fast in clearly marked arcs. From ancient canal disasters and trade wars, to the moment Piltover rose upward while Zaun sank, to modern chemtech empires, shimmer economies, and undercity revolutions. We will avoid getting lost in side lore, but we will pause on the key theories when they actually change how you read a character or a scene. This is your complete, compressed tour of life beneath the bridges. The only question now is, where does an undercity like this really begin? World setup. A city built on a wound in the world. To answer that, you have to zoom out, because Zaun's story doesn't start with shimmer, gangs, or kids running across rusted pipes. It starts with the world itself. Runeterra is a realm where magic leaks from mountains, oceans, and even the spaces between thoughts. Shurima has its ancient sun disks and buried empires. Ionia has spirit forests where immensely powerful entities walk beside mortals. But on the western coast of Valoran, the land did something different. It tore itself open. So how did a wound in the world become a city? Long ago, a natural canal cracked through the cliffs, connecting the cold northern seas to the warmer southern waters that lead towards Shurima and beyond. Storms, tides, and raw magic carved this channel deeper until ships could risk the passage. It was dangerous, unstable, and unpredictable, but it was also a shortcut that could change global trade. In order to turn that hazard into profit, early settlers clustered around the water's edge. They built rough docks on whatever rock would hold a mooring line, warehouses on the stilts, and workshops that could repair hulls battered by the canal's currents. This was Zaun, before it was called Zaun, a smoky improvised trade hub where you might see Shuriman glass, Freljordian furs, and Ixtali artifacts unloaded on the same creaking pier. Over centuries, engineers and mages learned to tame the canal. They raised colossal locks and gates, what would become the legendary Sun Gates. Essentially, these were arcane industrial valves in the coastline, regulating water flow with massive gears, runes, and reservoirs. Once the Sun Gates stabilised the passage, the canal turned into the single most important trade artery between Valoran and Shurima. Every ship that wanted the fastest route had to pass through this throat in the continent. Wealth poured in, so did ambition. New construction climbed upward onto the cliffs, chasing cleaner air and safer ground. I'm only speculating here, but you can imagine how quickly investors and scholars decided they preferred marble towers above the smog to damp tenements beside the locks. That elevated expansion would become Piltover, the city of progress, while the original maze of docks and workshops below kept the old name Zaun. From the beginning, this wasn't just an industrial complex. It was an arcane machine. Chemtech and hextech, distilled magic in vials and crystals, were wired into pumps, cranes, and engines. Pipes carried not only water and waste, but volatile reagents. Street lamps burned with bottled power. When those systems failed or leaked, the Undercity absorbed the cost in its air, its rivers, and eventually its people. In current times, you see the result. A literal vertical split. Bridges and platforms high above, shadows and fumes below. So how did one city fracture into an upper and lower world, and who was quietly pushed down every time another bridge went up? That's the fault line we need to follow next. Foundations of the Undercity. Before Piltover had a name to follow that fault line, you have to go back before Piltover even had a name. Long before gleaming bridges and hextech academies, there was only a cut in the earth, a tidal canal, and a swarm of mortals trying to survive around it. In this early era, the future Undercity is just a chaotic trade town clinging to the canyon walls. Ramshackle docks jut out over dark water, rebuilt every time a storm tears them away. Jury-rigged cranes swing on chains from rough stone gantries, hauling crates from ship to cliff with a prayer and a shouted warning. Sailors, smugglers, and desperate migrants crowd the piers, drawn from every corner of the world of Runeterra by the promise of work, or at least by the chance to disappear. So, how did order work in a place that barely held itself together? Essentially, it didn't. There is no council, no formal governor, no ancient charter. Power belongs to whoever controls the warehouses, the mooring rights, the crude alchemical workshops hidden behind warped doors. These are proto-chem barons in everything but name, immensely powerful in their tiny realms, settling disputes with hired muscle, not laws. In order to keep ships moving and coin flowing, early alchemists start to experiment. They brew cheap tonics for sailors to stay awake through double shifts, mix experimental fuels that burn hotter in cramped boiler rooms, and distill harsh industrial reagents to strip rust from chains. Safety standards are non-existent. If a batch explodes, that's a lesson. If a tonic rots someone's lungs, there are a dozen more workers on the next tide. I'm only speculating here, but you can imagine how quickly compassion erodes when every delay costs a freighter's profit. Even now, the city's class divide is already vertical. Wealthier traders and ship owners build their homes slightly higher on the cliffsides, where the smoke thins and the floodwaters rarely reach. Below them, shacks, boarding houses, and workshops crowd toward the waterline, pressed against the damp stone. Waste, broken crates, spoiled reagents, human runoff, slides downhill into the canal. You can already see the blueprint of the future sumps and entresol. Those who own the cranes live above them. Those who work the winches sleep beneath. Over time, every success makes the situation worse. More ships mean more warehouses stacked onto ledges. More experiments mean more volatile tanks bolted into rock that was never meant to bear the weight. The canyon walls bristle with additions: balconies, walkways, hanging cisterns of untested chem. The whole settlement becomes a layered machine, grinding toward prosperity while quietly sabotaging its own foundations. This is the real origin of the Piltover-Zaun split. Not a single law or war, but a slow architectural decision to solve every problem by building upward. The more the town grows, the more its poorest are trapped closer to the water, to the fumes, to the runoff of failed alchemy. In current times, you see the end result, but here you can watch the catastrophe being poured brick by brick into the bedrock. And when that overburdened canyon finally cracks, when one more tower, one more tank, one more experiment pushes it past its limit, who do you think will be left underneath the rubble? That collapse is coming, and it will not just reshape streets, it will permanently split a city and everyone in it into those above and those below. The Great Collapse, how Zaun fell and Piltover rose. That collapse isn't a metaphor, it's an event. A day when stone, steel and ambition all fail at once, and the city literally tears itself in half. So, how did a thriving canal hub become an undercity? It starts with the canal catastrophe. For years, alchemists had been boring deeper channels, widening locks, and hanging entire districts off the canyon walls in order to move more cargo between seas. Overbuilt aqueducts, reservoir towers and chem pipelines all pressed down on unstable rock that was already riddled with faults. Then one failure triggers another. A primary lock gate shears away, floodwaters hammer into weakened supports, and whole sections of cliff begin to slide. Around the canal, streets don't just crack, they tilt. Entire blocks pivot and then drop, dragging houses, markets, and workshops into the depths. Multi-story warehouses fold in on themselves. Bridges twist, snap, and scythe through anything below. Buried chem stores rupture, venting toxic clouds into the air and bleeding iridescent sludge into the water. In that moment, progress becomes shrapnel. Thousands die in minutes. Thousands more are entombed in half-collapsed galleries and flooded tunnels that will, essentially, become the sumps. The human cost is not just bodies, it's families separated on opposite sides of a new vertical chasm. It's workers trapped on sinking platforms while the rich flee uphill. I'm only speculating here, but you can imagine the stories. A barge captain watching his entire route vanish into a whirlpool, or a chem worker waking up in a room that now opens onto open air and smoke. This is the instant when down starts to mean danger in this part of Runeterra. In the aftermath, those with power make a choice. They could pour resources into hauling the buried districts back up, draining the new caverns, and rebuilding at the old ground level. Instead, the wealthier merchants, scholars, and clan leaders invest upward. In order to keep trade flowing, they stabilize the surviving cliff edges, anchor massive stone pylons, and begin to span the wound with new bridges and elevated platforms. What starts as emergency scaffolding hardens into terraces, sky streets, and gated promenades, the skeleton of Piltover's future upper city. Meanwhile, those who cannot afford to move up stay where gravity has left them. Their homes now sit in permanent twilight, under dripping arches and broken conduits. The ruins, flooded basements, and collapsed canals congeal into a semi-forgotten realm below, an immense cavity of rusted machinery and pooling chem waste. That is the seed of Zaun, not a planned district, but a population stranded in the shadow of reconstruction. From this point on, up and down are no longer just directions. They are class markers, etched into stone. Above, the rebuilt city brands itself as the city of progress, a beacon of orderly magic and refined hex tech. Below, Zaun absorbs every cost that progress refuses to show, and in current times, every breath, every job and every body in the Undercity still carries the imprint of that single, world-shaping fall. Timeline framework, from shared city to shadow twin. So, how did this broken, layered realm turn from a single harbour into a shadow twin of Piltover? In order to keep things clear, we're going to follow Zaun through 4 broad phases rather than exact dates. The pre-collapse trade town, the post-collapse split, the Hextech revolution above, and the modern Chem-Baron era below. In the pre-collapse phase, you have one city hugging the canal. Traders, sailors, and ancient merchant families crowd the docks. This is the seed of Zaun, a rough but central crossroads of Runeterra where goods, ideas, and early industrial magic flow through the same narrow streets. There is no upper or lower yet, just rich warehouses next to rusting shacks, all clinging to the same waterline. The post-collapse split is the moment gravity becomes destiny. The canal disaster tears the city's heart open, and the new construction above slowly brands itself as Piltover. What's left clinging to the old canal walls, flooded and poisoned, hardens into Zaun. From here on, every major change in Piltover casts a shadow below. Bridges, elevators, and pipelines are thrown across the gap, physically welding the two together. But law, culture, and responsibility do not travel as easily as cargo and waste. To understand daily life, you need Zaun's vertical map. At the very bottom sit the sumps, half-drowned districts where runoff, toxins, and failed experiments settle. This is where you find the worst Zaun grey lungs, twisted chemburn scars, and bodies reshaped by shimmer and other unstable chemtech. Above that is the entresol, the dense middle layer. Here, stacked housing, markets, and workshops form a maze of catwalks and jury-rigged elevators. It's chaotic, but it's also where most Zaunites live, work, and improvise their survival. Higher up, pressed against Piltover's underside, are the upper Zaunite districts. They catch a little more light and slightly cleaner air, and they act as transfer points where Piltover's goods come down and Zaun's labour and raw materials go up. Essentially, this is the contact zone. Piltover enforcers might patrol a bridge. Chem-Baron muscle controls the stairwell just beyond it. I'm only speculating here, but you can imagine how many quiet deals are made in those thresholds. From this point in the video, we'll move chronologically through Zaun's major events against this backdrop. First, the rise of chemtech and shimmer as immensely powerful tools that can heal, enhance, or destroy. Then, the consolidation of Chem-Baron power as private militias and factory monopolies replace any pretense of neutral governance. After that, we'll track Undercity resistance movements and uprisings. And finally, we'll dive into the personal arcs of key champions as case studies. So, how do you keep from getting lost in all this? Whenever a new technology, faction, or district appears, we'll anchor it twice. In time, by tying it to one of our 4 phases, and in space by placing it in the sumps, the entresol, or the upper districts. In current times, that's the only way to make sense of a world where one city became 2, and every step up or down a staircase is also a step through history. Chemtech awakens. When progress loses its brakes. Chemtech is what happens when that staircase between Piltover and Zaun turns into a chute. Progress doesn't just trickle down. It crashes, spills, and mutates in the dark. So, how did Zaun become the realm where science loses its brakes? Economically, it's brutally simple. Piltover wants clean, marketable hex tech, shining gemstones, neat interfaces, respectable academies. Anything that smells of unstable reagents, human trials, or moral ambiguity gets priced out of the upper city. In order to keep investors calm and trade flowing, the dangerous parts of innovation are outsourced downward into districts where regulation is more suggestion than law. That's where Chemtech takes root. Chemtech is industrialized alchemy fused with machinery, volatile fuels that keep furnaces roaring, combat stimulants for enforcers and gang muscle, prosthetics hammered together from brass and bone, and atmosphere-altering compounds that can clear or choke an entire street. It is designed to be cheap and effective, not safe. Essentially, if Hextech is about elegance and control, Chemtech is about raw output per coin, no matter what it does to the bodies of mortals or the air itself. Shimmer is the extreme edge of that mindset. You've seen a version of it in Arcane, a hyper-addictive, body-warping drug that offers instant strength, resilience, and escape from misery at the cost of health and sanity. In Zaun's world, Shimmer isn't an accident. It's the logical conclusion of results now, consequences later. I'm only speculating here, but you can imagine dozens of failed formulas before that one worked, each one tested on desperate workers, orphans, and disposable gang soldiers. This doesn't stay in secret labs. It bleeds into daily life. In the sumps, workers breathe experimental fumes in factories where the ventilation is an afterthought. Children grow up with Zaun grey lungs, wheezing in corridors stained by unknown spills. On the entresol, street markets sell cheap enhancement tonics alongside food, a vial to keep you awake for a triple shift, another to dull pain so you can climb rusted scaffolds. Casual body modification becomes normalised. A reinforced spine, a chem-filtered lung, or a mechanical arm is not a luxury, but a survival strategy. When the world itself is toxic, who wouldn't trade a piece of their flesh for a better chance to endure? In this environment, the champions you know are not anomalies, they are case studies. Sinjid's early human experimentation, treating bodies as raw material for his formulas, emerges naturally from a city that never truly said no. Warwick's transformation from man to chem-altered predator is horrifying, but in Zaun, it's just one more proof of concept stalking the alleys. Victor's fascination with augmenting the human form, replacing frail flesh with precise machinery, is a philosophical response to everything around him. If the realm is already reshaping you, why not seize that power on your own terms? In current times, that culture of unchecked experimentation is Zaun's curse and its greatest engine. And the question hanging over the Undercity is simple. When the experiments start pushing back, who will really be in control? The Chem Barons or the creations they unleashed? Life in the sumps, breathing poison, building futures. If the Chem Labs are Zaun's brain, the sumps are its scarred lungs. This is the lowest tier of the Undercity, where the cost of Piltover's progress condenses into a permanent, poisonous fog. Down here, the air itself is work. Every breath drags in a slurry of soot, metal dust, and chem fumes that stain the inside of your chest a dull, permanent Zaun grey. So, how did that become normal? Generations of exposure mean most mortals born in the sumps wheeze before they can walk, and coughing up black phlegm is just part of the morning routine. Overhead, the sky is a maze of pipes, catwalks and leaking cisterns. Sunlight arrives as a rumour filtered through metal grates and greenish chem smog. Underfoot, you move through ankle-deep runoff, a chemical soup that leaves raw red burns on bare skin and slowly eats through boots. The survival economy here is as layered as the rust. At street level, you have scrap kids picking through heaps of Piltover's discarded tech, hunting for a single intact gear or hex crystal shard that might buy dinner. Above them, on rickety platforms bolted into canyon walls, adults clock into chem plants, where a missed step or a faulty mask means permanent lung damage. Along the canal, shadowy boats run smuggling routes, hauling shimmer, weapons, and black market chemtech between hidden docks. Essentially, every object has a price, and every price has a health cost. Markets not around junctions where 3 or 4 pipe bridges meet. There, you can buy fried sump eel, stolen Piltover rations, or illegal body enhancements that promise stronger arms, sharper eyes, or immunity to certain toxins. I'm only speculating here, but in a realm where the world itself is trying to unmake your body, voluntary modification starts to feel less monstrous and more practical. Housing follows the same brutal logic. Tenements are stacked into the rock like barnacles, rooms subdivided again and again until a home is a single damp cube for 6 people. Some families lash shanties onto floating platforms, drifting on chemical slicks and tying themselves to pylons when the currents surge. In order to survive, extended families merge, or strangers become found families, pooling food, tools, and watch shifts. Privacy is rare. Shared obligation is not. This is the cradle of Echo's lost children of Zaun. Kids grow up breathing poison, dodging falling scrap, and learning that powerful entities in Piltover will never come to save them. So, how did they adapt? They turned the city into a playground and a weapon. They build gadgets from trash, time-bending devices, jury-rigged explosives, hookshot lines made from cable and rusted pulleys. They map every shortcut through the sumps, slipping through gaps before Chem Baron enforcers can close a fist. Cynicism comes early, but so does loyalty. Betray your crew here, and you might not wake up tomorrow. Yet, misery doesn't have the final word. In current times, you still hear music echoing through the metal canyons. Improvised drums and hacked-together speakers, turning maintenance tunnels into dance floors. Graffiti blooms on every flat surface. Piltover's golden towers crossed out. Zaunite symbols painted over them in defiance. Festivals erupt around a safe water tap or a rare clear air pocket, with lanterns made from chem glass and fireworks cobbled from factory scraps. There is a stubborn pride in being Zaunite, a sense that this wounded realm belongs to them more than to any council above. And that pride leads to a dangerous question. If you've learned to build futures out of waste and survive magic-tainted poison, why would you only dream of escape? Why not dream of taking the Undercity back? And what happens when the sumps decide the world above has had enough time in the sun? The entresol, Zaun's beating broken heart. That question doesn't stay theoretical for long, because the moment you climb out of the sumps, you hit the entresol. This is Zaun's beating broken heart, the middle city suspended between drowning and daylight, where most of the Undercity actually breathes bargains and pleads. The entresol is the dense band of streets and stacked walkways that hangs above the worst floodwaters, but below the rare patches of open sky. Essentially, it's the normal zone that almost no outsider ever sees. Here, cramped tenements squeeze against machine shops, cheap clinics glow with sickly chemlight, and taverns spill noise into corridors that never fully sleep. In order to understand Zaun as a realm, you have to stand here at rush hour and watch. Workers from the sumps trudging up in filter masks, apprentices running messages, and exhausted chemtech welders closing their shutters only to open them again for night work. So, how did this middle city become the crossroads of an entire underworld? Everything that matters passes through it. Goods from Piltover descend on rattling lifts and guarded cable carts, changing hands 3 or 4 times before they reach a stall. Sumps labourers ride rusted platforms upward to factories and refineries, then back down before curfew. In shadowed back rooms, chem-baron factors tally shipments, sign off on bribes, and quietly decide who gets medicine and who gets shimmer. Information moves even faster than contraband. Rumours, black market tech, and half-finished inventions circulate from table to table until some immensely powerful idea catches fire. But that circulation is never free. Every street in the entresol belongs to someone. Territorial crews paint sigils on railings and bolt their colours to balcony edges, turning stairwells into checkpoints. Small workshops pay protection in coin, parts, or favours, knowing that refusal means broken tools at best and vanished family at worst. Violence is common here, yet usually calculated rather than random. A warning shot into a chem sign, a midnight beating in an alley, a single body left where everyone will see. I'm only speculating here, but for many mortals that predictability almost feels safer than Piltover's distant, indifferent law. Despite that constant threat, the entresol is also where Zaun's culture shines brightest. Street performers juggle chem lights that trail luminous vapours, turning toxic fumes into improvised magic. Kids turn abandoned factory floors into arenas, playing brutal, fast-paced games with scavenged gear as goalposts and jury-rigged hex tech as prizes. You can spot a true Zaunite at a glance: layered, repurposed gear, welding goggles pushed up as headbands, respirators customised into fashion, and protective plates painted in family or crew colours. Their shared speech and gestures mark them as a people forged by pressure. In current times, this is also the stage where champions and factions intersect. Echo and his friends thread through these alleys, using forgotten catwalks as escape routes and laboratories for time-bending experiments. Renata Glasch's polished offices and legitimate storefronts rise from the same blocks, her corporate banners fluttering above chem-baron enforcers who pretend to be security staff. Criminal syndicates meet in back rooms to divide territory or plan raids on Piltover's shipments. Quiet deals made over one cracked table can ignite explosive confrontations a week later, and above all of it, you feel the tension building. If the entresol is Zaun's heart, what happens when that heart decides to push back, upward toward Piltover's bridges, and downward toward the sumps that refuse to stay buried? Chem-barons, the unelected kings of Zaun. To understand that pressure, you have to meet the people who shape it. In Zaun, there are no elected councils, no formal lords, no official laws that anyone respects for long. There are chem-barons, and in current times they are the unelected kings of the Undercity. A chem-baron is not just a rich factory owner. It is a powerful industrialist and crime lord fused into one immensely dangerous entity. They control chemtech refineries, shimmer labs, shipment routes through the canals, and the private militias that guard them. Essentially, if something burns, hisses, or explodes in Zaun, a chem-baron is probably making money from it. You are not just dealing with a merchant, you are dealing with a warlord who files paperwork. So, how did they become so dominant? Their power base rests on infrastructure, not ideology. They own the factories that provide most of the Undercity's jobs, from recycling Piltover's scrap to brewing volatile chems that keep the realm's black markets running. They monopolise clean water systems, air filter towers, and the few reliable medical chem dispensaries. In order to discipline an entire neighbourhood, a chem-baron does not need a prison. They just shut off the pumps, close the gates, or stop the shifts, and overnight thousands of mortals lose food, medicine, and shelter. Control, however, is never just about turning valves. It is about turning people. Many workers are paid in company scrip redeemable only at Baron-owned stores, trapping families in generations of debt bondage. Chems themselves become chains, stimulants for longer shifts, shimmer variants for pain, stability tonics to manage mutations. Miss a payment, speak to an organizer or question the foreman, and your supply dries up. I'm only speculating here, but you can imagine how quickly fear spreads when one worker collapses in the street as a quiet warning. When threats are not enough, there is targeted violence. Militia squads break up meetings, disappear agitators, or torch a rival's warehouse to send a message. Then, as a pattern interrupt, those same barons host food lines, fund ramshackle clinics, or pay for bridge repairs. They pose as protectors of their districts, insisting that without them, Zaun would fall into chaos. The truth is more twisted. They create the chaos they then offer to manage. Renata Glaschk shows what this system is evolving into. She is a chem baron who wrapped herself in the language of contracts and investment rather than open thuggery. Her chem-based mind control turns loyalty into a chemical setting, while her financial schemes bind entire businesses through predatory loans and exclusivity deals. In her hands, magic, money, and chems merge into one seamless instrument of power. The ancient blunt force barons ruled with clubs and guns. Renata rules with signatures, subtle vapours, and clauses you never saw. All of this keeps Zaun functioning just enough to be profitable. But the chem barons are not a united council. They are rival entities locked in constant struggle over docks, refineries, and smuggling routes to Piltover. Every short-term grab for territory risks igniting a chain reaction that could tear the Undercity apart. So the question becomes, can Zaun ever be more than a battlefield for its own supposed guardians? Or will the next spark finally burn through the foundations holding this world's Undercity together? Work, bodies, and upgrades. What survival costs in Zaun? And that battlefield doesn't stop at borders or alleyways. It continues inside people's bodies. In Zaun, survival isn't just about where you work, but what you're willing to let your own flesh endure. Most mortals here start in the same place, labour, long shifts in chem refineries where the air itself peels your lungs, hazardous maintenance in the pipeworks crawling through rusted arteries that keep Piltover's trade realm flowing. Courier runs through toxic zones, racing across catwalks over green-black sumps where one misstep means a chem bath. There are no unions, no healers on retainer, no real safety nets. If you fall straight through the cracks of the world. So, how did people adapt in order to stay useful? They modified. Lost an arm to a pressure valve? You strap on a cheap piston-driven prosthetic and go back to the line. Chronic respiratory illness from years in the refineries. You buy a rebreather mask that fuses to your jaw, or chem-treated lungs that wheeze but keep you moving. Chemical scarring and slow mutations become common enough that smooth, unmarked skin is almost exotic. Essentially, the body becomes another piece of equipment. The cheapest upgrades are crude: iron claws instead of fingers, bolted knee joints, glass vials of shimmer wired into veins as makeshift fuel. Better augments with cleaner hextech or refined chemtech turn into status symbols. I'm only speculating here, but in a place where your neighbour's new arm can actually lift 3 times as much as yours, how long before you start to feel obsolete in your own skin? This is where Victor's philosophy lands with immense power. In a realm where work and environment are constantly grinding people down, his idea of the glorious evolution isn't abstract. It's a promise. Why cling to frail, suffering bodies when you can become something more efficient, more enduring? To many Zaunites, that doesn't sound monstrous, it sounds merciful. But the same current that carries Victor's dream also drags people toward darker shores. Warwick is the nightmare endpoint of experimental enhancement. A man torn apart and rebuilt into a hunting machine, his humanity dissolved in chem and rage. Twitch is what happens when toxic exposure and mutation aren't managed, but abandoned. An intelligent rat twisted by waste, a walking reminder that Zaun's runoff can spawn new entities entirely. And deep in the sumps, Zac forms from discarded chem slime, a living experiment that proves even industrial refuse can wake up and ask who it is. In current times, all of these champions are less exceptions and more mirrors of Zaun's body economy. When your unmodified body is a liability, is choosing dangerous upgrades really a choice, or just another way the system forces you to gamble with your humanity? And if the city keeps raising the stakes, what happens when people finally decide that it's not their bodies that need changing, but Zaun itself? Power players above and below. Piltover's shadow governance. If Zaun's body economy shows you what people are forced to do, its politics show you who's forcing them. Above the smog, Piltover presents itself as something pure, a shining city of progress carefully insulated from the chaos below. Officially, Zaun is a separate, self-governing realm. Piltover's council insists its duty is only to safeguard trade, innovation and law within its own borders. So, how did that neat separation become the story everyone repeats? Over time, Piltover learned that distance is a shield. By declaring Zaun independent, the Golden City can enjoy cheap Undercity labour, bottomless waste pits for industrial byproducts, and deniable chemtech experiments, all while claiming clean hands. Essentially, Piltover gets to say, we sell hextech, not suffering. What happens under the bridges is someone else's problem. In order to keep that illusion stable, a second government forms in the shadows. Piltover merchants, academy patrons, and even discreet council members negotiate directly with chem barons. They want lower production costs, supply chains that never stop, and places to test volatile magic or dangerous devices far from polite salons. I'm only speculating here, but you can imagine contracts that never appear in any archive. Shipments routed through the sumps, payments in untraceable scrip, promises that certain agitators will simply disappear. Those chem barons, in turn, become immensely powerful entities in their own right. They command private militias, weaponized chemtech, and entire districts of desperate mortals. When unrest threatens the bridges or the trade arteries, Piltover doesn't send an army. It sends a message. A price is agreed upon. A rival gang is armed. A protest is drowned in shimmer and fear gas before it ever reaches the lift gates. On paper, Piltover's wardens remain noble guardians of order. In practice, they outsource the dirty work to the very criminals they publicly condemn. This creates a brutal enforcement asymmetry. Piltover enforcers rarely descend unless Piltover interests are directly at risk. A sabotaged hextech line, a kidnapped researcher, a bridge tower bomb threat. Day-to-day law in Zaun is administered by whoever has the most guns, golems, or gas today. Some neighbourhoods rely on gang truces, others on barren militias, and a few on fragile community councils trying to keep children out of crossfire. Justice is local, improvised, and always contingent. You can probably feel what that does to Zaunite resentment. From the Undercity's perspective, Piltover is a parasite feeding on their world. The Golden City profits from their lungs, their labour, their bodies, then retreats behind legal fictions when anything goes wrong. Revolutionary cells, from subtle pamphleteers to bomb makers, frame Piltover not as a distant neighbour, but as an occupying force that never had the courage to plant its flag openly. In current times, that fragile balance is starting to wobble. Chemtech grows more refined and more deadly. Zaun's innovators, from visionaries like Victor to street geniuses like Echo, are proving they don't need Piltover's permission or its funding to reshape Runeterra. So what happens when the Undercity realises it doesn't have to play the role Piltover wrote for it? And if the bridges ever become battlegrounds instead of lifelines, which city actually holds the real power? Speculation. Break. Is Zaun a victim or a co-conspirator? So how did Zaun end up here? A realm that can build wonders, yet can't keep its own children from choking on the air. Before we go further in the timeline, this is our speculation break. Everything you're about to hear blends canon facts with interpretive theory about Zaun's agency in its own condition. Essentially, one story paints Zaun as a pure victim. Piltover rises above after the canal disaster, seizing the high ground, the trade routes, and the official narrative. Zaun becomes the Undercity, literally beneath the Golden City. And from that point on, Piltover controls tariffs, access to Hextech, and who gets called a legitimate citizen of the modern world. Toxic runoff, failed experiments, and industrial waste flow downward. The sumps don't choose to be flooded with poison. They are the basin for Piltover's progress. In order to survive, Zaunites take whatever work they can. Factory shifts that scar lungs with Zaun Grey, hauling volatile chemtech, testing unstable shimmer. When your choices are slow, death by poverty, or fast money in a chem-barren plant, is that really a choice? I'm only speculating here, but this structural trap explains why whole districts cling to dangerous industries even when they know the cost. The dependency is baked in. Piltover keeps the contracts and the clean air, Zaun gets the risk. But there's another angle, and it's much harsher. What if Zaun is not just a victim, but a co-conspirator in its own suffering? Chem barons like Renata Glass do not merely endure the system, they weaponize it. They run private militias, manipulate debt, and sell chemtech that can enthrall workers or wipe out rivals. Some of these immensely powerful entities collaborate directly with Piltover elites, trading labour, smuggled goods and silence in exchange for profit. Echo's firelights show that collective organisation is possible. So why don't more Zaunites follow that path? Here, culture matters. Over generations, the Undercity's chaos becomes identity. Zaunites wear scars, grafts and mutations as proof that they've survived what pampered topsiders could not. Danger becomes a badge of honour. Reform efforts from above feel patronising, and even internal movements can be dismissed as soft or Piltover's puppets. This fatalism, the sumps have always been this way, they always will be, makes it harder to unite against chem-baron rule. In current times, you can see that tension in Victor's idealism versus Singed's ruthless experimentation. Pattern interrupt. What if both stories are true at once? A city crushed by external exploitation and at the same time fragmented by its own power-hungry leaders and proud of the very traits that keep it unstable. In the end, regardless of where you place the blame, the outcome is the same. Zaun becomes a place where progress and suffering are inseparable, where magic and machinery rewrite mortals' bodies in back-alley labs, and where every breakthrough has a body count. The next generation of champions, kids growing up under leaking pipes and flickering chem lights, will have to decide whether they uphold this brutal balance or finally try to break it. And as the tension with Piltover escalates, you'll see how that choice drags the entire world of Runeterra into the fallout. Undercity resistance, Echo, the lost children, and the spark of change. And that next generation already has a face. In the dripping maze of the sumps, under rusted walkways and broken chem pipes, a boy named Echo grows up watching time steal everything from his realm. Friends poisoned, families crushed in factory accidents, promises from Piltover and chem barons that never arrive. So how did a Sumps kid turn that anger into something approaching magic? Echo is a prodigy of scrap and consequence. He scavenges discarded hex-tech, studies how Piltover's immensely powerful devices bend reality, and does the unthinkable. He reverse engineers it. In order to survive, he turns stolen shards and jury-rigged coils into the Z-Drive, a device that lets him rewind brief moments. On paper, it's a clever trick with temporal energy. Symbolically, it's a Sumps child grabbing the script of Runeterra and trying to scribble a different ending in the margins. Around him gathers a different kind of gang. They call them the Lost Children of Zaun, but they're not a formal order or ancient cult. They're runaways, orphans, and kids who slipped through every crack the chem barons left. They occupy forgotten water towers, hollowed-out ducts, and abandoned processing plants. Essentially, they're building a parallel city in the blind spots of everyone who claims to rule Zaun. Their tools are whatever the world throws away. Broken conveyor belts become zip lines. Failed chemtech prototypes become alarms or shields. I'm only speculating here, but you can imagine how many Piltover test runs end up as raw material in their hideouts. Where adults see waste, these children see infrastructure. They carve hidden bridges between districts, paint-coded symbols on walls, and map routes that avoid patrols and poison clouds. Crucially, their philosophy rejects the usual Zaunite dream. They're not trying to become the next chem baron or the Undercity version of a Piltover councillor. They want a Zaun, where kids don't have to trade their lungs for a day's wage. Tech, for them, is a shield, not a whip. In order to claim power, they refuse the model of power that broke their parents. So how does that play out in practice? Night after night, Echo and his friends sabotage the worst operations, cracking pressure valves so illegal refineries shut down before they explode, jamming shipment schedules so shimmer runs arrive late and diluted, rerouting cargo skiffs so food and filters vanish from chem baron stores and reappear in Sumps tenements. Each act is small. Together they start to feel like a new law of motion in this world. They also experiment with safe zones in the most literal sense. One rooftop garden shielded with improvised filters. One tunnel network where no gang is allowed to collect tolls. These places are proof of concept, living arguments that Zaun does not have to be a sacrifice zone. In current times, that might be the most dangerous idea in the entire Undercity. Because if Echo's decentralized, community-driven model spreads, it threatens everyone. Chem barons lose their monopoly on fear. Piltover loses its leverage over a permanently desperate workforce. And the first real revolution in this divided city might not start in a council chamber or a laboratory, but in a rusted clock tower where a boy with broken hex-tech rewinds a few seconds and asks, "What if we do it differently this time?" The moment those questions spread beyond the Sumps, Zaun stops being just a dumping ground for Piltover's excess and becomes a political fault line for all of Runeterra. And the entities who profit from the current balance? They will not watch that shift quietly. Mad science and monstrosity singed Warwick and the edge of humanity. But if Zaun is a political fault line, it's also a laboratory with no walls. And in that open-air lab, no one embodies the city's darkest potential more than Singed. Singed is the archetypal Zaunite mad scientist. Essentially, he is what happens when immense intellect is given absolute freedom and zero conscience. In Piltover, ethics boards and guild charters limit what mortals can do with magic and chemtech. In Zaun's Undercity, Singed conducts trials in flooded basements and forgotten cisterns, turning the entire realm beneath the bridges into a petri dish. So, how did that shape everyday life? It normalised the idea that any alley, any clinic, might hide a genius whose curiosity is more dangerous than any weapon. In order to understand how far this can go, you look at Warwick. Once he was a man tied to Zaun's criminal underworld, a thug who bled the streets for coin. After Singed, he becomes something else, a chemically altered predator, all steel claws and alchemical rage, stalking the pipes above the sumps. His transformation is not a myth, it is a process, needles, restraints, volatile chem formulas, that fuses Zaun's violence with its technology until the result barely remembers being human. Warwick is more than a monster. He is a warning carved into flesh. Every scream echoing through the ducts, every rumour of a shadow that hunts chem barons and gang runners reinforces a single idea. In Zaun, the tools you use to survive can turn you into something the world of Runeterra no longer recognises. I'm only speculating here, but you can imagine parents telling children that if they run with the wrong crews, they do not end up in prison. They end up on Singed's table. Socially, this creates a constant low-level terror. People vanish from taverns and factory lines and never come home. A debt unpaid, a favour owed, and someone is recruited for a trial. Stories spread of cages submerged in chem waste, of figures with too many eyes glimpsed through steam grates. Are these immensely powerful entities from some other realm, or just failed experiments still wandering the entresol? No one is sure, and that uncertainty is its own form of control. Yet the most chilling part is how ordinary all of this feels. Street-front clinics offer cheap lung grafts to clear Zaun grey, or inject shimmer to keep workers awake through double shifts. Workshops promise stronger arms, sharper eyes, faster reflexes. The same logic that drives Singed, results over ethics, enhancement over safety, runs quietly through these places. So, how did the edge of monstrosity become a business model? By making the first few upgrades work well enough that people stop asking questions. In current times, the line between patient, volunteer, and test subject is almost impossible to see. A signature on a stained ledger, a handshake in a back room, and your body becomes data in someone's private experiment. And as chemtech grows more precise and more invasive, you have to wonder, when the next Warwick wakes up in the dark, will he even remember that he used to be human? Or will Zaun decide that humanity itself is just another variable to discard in the pursuit of progress? Corporate chemocracy, Renata Glask and the New Order. Publicly, Renata is everything Zaun was told it could never have. She is a philanthropist funding clinics that filter a fraction of the poison from the air, an industrialist promising jobs in gleaming refineries, an advocate for economic independence from Piltover's disdain. In current times, if you ask a desperate factory worker who really cares about the Undercity, the answer isn't a council or a hero, it's her logo. So, how did that happen? Essentially, Renata understood that in a world built on unstable chemtech, the most powerful entities aren't just the ones who make the drugs. They're the ones who write the terms of use. Her benevolent chems stabilize lungs, sharpen focus, numb chronic pain. But they also carry subtle, mind-altering properties, making you more suggestible, less resistant, more inclined to trust the woman who saved your life yesterday. In order to receive those treatments, you sign things: work agreements, debt schedules, supply contracts for your whole neighbourhood. The language is dense, the clause is buried, the penalties immense. Miss a payment and your medicine stops. Miss enough and your body, already reshaped by her products, may not survive the withdrawal. I'm only speculating here, but you can imagine how many Zaunites never even realise they crossed a line until they're already owned. This is where she diverges from the older chem barons. They rule through obvious fear, Visible bruises, open gunfire, vats of shimmer as both weapon and reward. Renata rules through aspiration and dependency. She convinces mortals that if they want their children to breathe cleaner air, attend a functional school, or escape the sumps, the path runs straight through Glask Industries. Refuse her, and you're not just defying a baron, you're throwing away the only ladder you've ever seen. That shift reshapes Zaun's politics. Power, which used to be a patchwork of gangs and informal deals, starts to formalise. Renata builds quasi-legal institutions, arbitration offices, security forces with uniforms, community investment boards that look suspiciously like governments. What passes for law in Zaun increasingly arrives stamped with a corporate seal, not a public mandate. Contracts become more binding than any ancient code or civic promise, and this has consequences far beyond one district. As figures like Renata consolidate their holdings, Zaun stops being just a chaotic sump under Piltover and starts to resemble a coherent block, a corporate city-state in all but name. When one immensely powerful executive controls chems, labour and loyalty for half the Undercity, she can walk into Piltover's shining halls and negotiate as an equal, or threaten to shut the valves and let the Golden City feel what dependency really means. The question is, when Zaun finally has someone strong enough to speak for it, will she speak for its people, or only for her balance sheet? Ongoing fault lines, pollution, addiction, and the price of progress. In order to understand what that balance sheet really means, you have to zoom back out and look at the fault lines running through the entire Undercity. Zaun isn't just poor, it's structurally poisoned. The realm itself has been engineered into a pressure cooker. Start with the air. In current times, whole districts live under a permanent green haze, a slow-moving storm of chem smog that stains stone and skin. The sumps breathe it most, their lungs turning Zaun grey before adulthood, their eyes watering from fumes that would be lethal to most mortals topside. Water trickles down from Piltover's pristine canals, picks up runoff from ancient pipes and modern factories, and arrives in the depths as a shimmering, oily film. So, how did some neighbourhoods become almost uninhabitable? Essentially, every breakthrough in chemtech dumped its waste into the same confined basin. People stay because there is nowhere else to go. Families stack in rusted tenements bolted to cliff walls, one cough away from collapse, because the only alternative is the open fissure or the Piltover enforcers' batons. Mutations spread through the population, some subtle, some grotesque. For every twitch scuttling through the sewers, there are 100 Zaunites with extra growths, translucent skin, or nerves burned numb by constant exposure. On top of that environmental decay sits another kind of control: addiction. Shimmer-like chems promise escape, strength, or simply the ability to keep working one more shift on a ruined body. A worker takes a dose to lift heavier loads. A gang runner injects a cocktail to outrun rivals. A sick child receives a chem medicine that heals now but hooks forever. I'm only speculating here, but you can imagine how easy it becomes for chem barons to trade doses for loyalty. A population chasing its next vial is easier to exploit and much harder to organise. Socially, Zaun is fragmented by design. Rival chem barons carve the city into fiefdoms, each with private militias and pet scientists. Gangs fight over bridges and vents. Ideologues argue over the future. Reformers wanting recognition from Piltover, revolutionaries dreaming of tearing the upper city down, and escapists building hidden enclaves or time-bending sanctuaries like Echo's lost children. So, how did this immensely powerful, chaotic mix fail to become a united front? Every faction pulls a different direction, and any leader who grows too strong becomes a target for the rest. Meanwhile, the experiments never stop. Singe's work leaks into the ecosystem. Zack is the rare benevolent outcome of a process that could easily have birthed a dozen different horrors. Rumours speak of deeper, more toxic levels below even the sumps, where failed chem weapons and ancient machinery still hum. One industrial accident, one ruptured tank, and chem clouds could billow upward, turning Piltover's golden skyline into another smog-choked canyon. These aren't static conditions, they're ongoing arcs. Every new invention, every new baron, every new act of resistance adds more pressure to an already unstable world. The question isn't whether something will give, it's what breaks first and who will seize that moment of collapse. Near-present Zaun, a complete tour of a city on the edge. In current times, all of that pressure has solidified into a single, unstable moment. You're not just looking at a tragic Undercity anymore. You're looking at a realm that has finished its long fall and is now deciding whether it's going to stay broken or weaponize its own ruin. So, how did we get to this exact snapshot? You've seen Zaun as an ancient river-crossing trade town. Then watch the canal disaster carve a permanent fault line between mortals above and mortals below. You followed the rise of chemtech, the chem barons turning smog into power, and the newer currents, Echo's youth movement rewinding the future, Renata Glaschk building an immensely powerful corporate empire out of debt, patents, and politely worded threats. Essentially, the present-day Zaun you can imagine now is a composite morning in the Undercity. Chem baron factories roar at full tilt, venting green fire into a sky that never truly clears. Conveyor belts drag raw shimmer synthetic organs and illegal hex-tech toward armoured trucks. Down in the sumps, kids crack open stolen Piltover gadgets, wiring them into jury-rigged hoverboards or makeshift alarm grids. I'm only speculating here, but half of Piltover's missing prototypes probably end up on these workbenches. Walk a little higher into the entresol, and Renata's sigil is everywhere. Her branding glows above half the clinics and chem shops, promising stability in a world that has never had any. In order to get treatment for Zaun grey lungs or a replacement limb, you sign a contract that quietly rewrites your future. Somewhere overhead, Victor's laboratories bridge Zaun and Piltover, testing new forms of magic-infused technology that could heal the city or turn it into an experiment no one can control. But the vertical stratification you've been tracking never went away. It just deepened. The sumps function as the sacrificial layer, absorbing toxins, runoff, and discarded test subjects. The entresol is the packed, beating heart where markets, gangs, and chem baron militias collide in endless negotiations. Upper Zaun presses against Piltover's underside, an interface where customs inspectors, smugglers, and visionaries all argue over what progress should cost. It's the same city, yet each layer experiences a different world. Champions map neatly onto these strata. Echo and the lost children dart between sumps and entresol, turning forgotten alleys into immensely powerful staging grounds for resistance. Victor works in elevated labs, half accepted by Piltover, half claimed by Zaun's dreamers. Renata signs deals in gleaming offices that literally overlook the chaos she monetizes. Twitch, Zack, Warwick, and Singed haunt the forgotten spaces in between, sewers, hidden labs, and slaughter alleys where the city's worst secrets congeal. By now, you have a complete tour. The history, the power structures, the daily realities, all locked into a single mental map of Zaun on the edge. So what happens when something finally tips that balance? When one more experiment, one more riot, or one more accident turns the Undercity from pressure cooker into detonation? What Zaun really means, and where its story goes next. That's where we go next, because Zaun isn't just a backdrop, it's an argument. In the wider realm of Runeterra, Zaun is the answer to a single brutal question: who pays for progress? Essentially, every smokestack, every chem lab, every shimmer vial is a receipt. The world gets miracles. The Undercity gets the bill. In order to understand Zaun's role, you have to see it as Piltover's shadow and its mirror. Piltover is the curated story of progress. Clean hex tech, regulated academies, respectable innovation. Zaun is what happens when you strip away the ethics committee and ask, what can we do, instead of what should we do? So, how did that shape the city's identity? It turned the Undercity into a living experiment, where immensely powerful entities, mortals, and machines collide with almost no restraint. That's why Zaun's story is never just poor victims underground. The core tension you've seen is this. Is Zaun only crushed by Piltover's greed, or does its own culture of risk and ruthlessness make it complicit? Victor embraces evolution through pain. Singe turns morality into a variable in his equations. Renata Glaschk builds an empire on debt, dependency, and chem control. I'm only speculating here, but if you grew up breathing Zaun grey from birth, would you choose a safe, short life, or roll the dice on dangerous empowerment, even if it warps your body and your mind? In current times, that choice is scaling up into open conflict. Chem barons are consolidating, fusing gangs and factories into something close to a corporate chemocracy. Youth resistance movements, from Echo's Lost Children to unnamed street crews, are testing how far you can push back before the barons start a private war. So, how did this stay under the bridges for so long? It didn't, really. The fumes, the trade, the weapons and the ideas all leak upward. Zaun is a pressure fracture in the world's foundation, and fractures don't stay local forever. Here's the pattern interrupt. What if Zaun isn't a warning, but a prototype? If Piltover, Noxus, or even distant Shuriman city-states adopt the same progress at any cost logic, Zaun stops being an exception and becomes the blueprint for the world. That's when chemtech on the streets, shimmer in armies, and singed tier bioweapons stop being regional horrors and start rewriting global power. So, which champion feels like the real Undercity to you? Echo's time-bending hope, Victor's relentless evolution, Renata's cold control, Singed's ruthless curiosity, or someone else entirely, maybe Zack, as the accidental conscience of chemtech? Tell me who you think carries Zaun's true spirit and why. Comment your theories about Zaun's future, uprising, collapse, or a new kind of city that forces Runeterra to change around it. Then tell me which region or city you want a full life on the ground breakdown of next. Noxus, Ionia, Bilgewater, somewhere more obscure. And if you want more dense, fast-paced lore deep dives across the world of Runeterra, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next realm we dissect from street level up.